everyone. Welcome back. This is our official first podcast that we're going to be talking about the different educational system versus East versus West in terms of Asian. Let's mostly East when people say East is Asian and West, the Western world. Let's say Western Europe and North America. So we're going to be discussing what are the differences that we have personally experienced, both West and East, as well as the benefits and which one we think is better or not, depending on how the discussion results. All right. So East versus West, I think, in terms of our experience, like Chuck, you yourself, you grew up in Canada, but I think you have family back in Taiwan. What would you say? Like, did you feel any differences in terms of what you had to do in Canada versus what heard they had to do in Taiwan, like in terms of teaching and those kind of things?
Yeah, there were so growing up here, definitely the impression that I got from my parents was that being in the Western education system, I was very privileged. And so basically
Don't
they
use
they
the word privilege. I hate
they
that word.
they made it
Everybody's
no,
privileged.
but my parents made always made it a point to remind me that if I was in school in Taiwan, the stress level would be
You'd be
so
crying.
huge that, like, I don't know, I just remember hearing uh, reports from the news of students in Taiwan, like, basically, well, I can't say the word now because YouTube will demonetize the video, but basically, expiring themselves.
Going to the other
And,
side.
and so that's how heavy the stress is. I don't know if it's the same in China too, because my understanding is they also have Dakao. Is that right? Big
Yeah,
exam, right?
big exam, final exam, middle
Final exam.
exam. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the same thing. It's the same idea where the stress of studying is so huge out there. Where here in the West, there's a lot of freedom to explore. There's a freedom to find yourselves, to more emphasis on the actual student themselves in terms of trying to cultivate themselves, to find themselves, to
Right,
to
right.
to identify where they want to do, where do they want to be. Whereas in the East, it's like, my understanding is that it's constant barrage of, you got to master this, you got to master this, and then it's drilling, drilling,
But
drilling until you've mastered everything,
okay,
right?
but then to separate the two, like how much of that is really the system and really the culture, right? And like for example, I've had friends or like acquaintances who have decided to explore the other side because they didn't get into a certain school in Canada.
Mhm.
All right. So I don't know if that's necessarily like I would agree that yes, maybe it no, not maybe it is obviously more prevalent. There's a video in the future we'll explore on some of these things in the East of what some of the things that the students go through and whatnot. But I would think that like the educational system and the culture are tied together in that sense, right? So the question is like if these students came here, would they also feel the same way, or would they, because of the educational system, or would they be able to deal with some of their failures a little bit differently because of the education system in Canada, or would they essentially react the same way? Do you know what I mean? Like how much is it the system and how much is it the culture? And that's I understand that's kind of hard to answer because they're kind of intertwined. But really, is it really the Asian system that's pushing them to to the education system that's pushing them to learn, or is it the actual culture that's pushing them to learn, right? Like and again, like I said, I know they're both influenced, but if you were to try to separate some, which one is it?
I think the way that the Eastern school systems, the way they're set up,
Okay.
it changes the culture to the point where, the people who are in that culture actually are trying to make those benchmarks
Right.
because the benchmarks are so high, right? And so over here, we've got a grading system, and although the ultimate grading system and percentage system eventually leads to which university you go to attend. Uh, it doesn't pigeonhole you to certain areas because I know that specifically in Taiwan, if you don't make the higher mark, then you get basically tiered.
Hmm.
So if you score in the bottom part of the national exam, you're tiered at the bottom. If you're at the bottom in terms of your results, then you're tiered at the bottom, and there are only certain universities or colleges that you could attend where you wouldn't be able to go study, say, medicine
Well,
or things higher tiered professions, right? So that over here, I mean, yes, to the same degree because your percentage still has to account for essentially if you want to say apply for engineering or become a doctor or whatever it is, um, it still applies. But then people here, you then have other options to be able to explore, like other fields and other other career paths, right? Whereas I guess overseas in the East, it's much more limiting.
okay, so I think for me, I keep struggling with separating the culture and the system again because I think the real answer is one influences the other, right? But it's a chicken and the egg, right? Which comes first, which comes second, right? But in terms of when you made the references, like, okay, well, tiers isn't that the same here with, let's say, particularly the states with the SATs? I mean, if you want to go to the top schools, you gotta have some top SATs, and if you don't get top SATs, you're just going to community college, right? And by the way, that's
Yeah,
probably better nowadays than most universities, anyways. But that's another topic. But I think, um, like I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of I don't want to call it a stereotype, but there's a lot of like traditional things that we accept. Like, okay, this is the way it is over there, this is the way it is over here. And I think for the large part, it is true. I don't disagree with that. That when I was in Korea, I've seen this a lot where the students would come to class and they would learn absolutely nothing because they would have, in Korea they call it the hagwon, which is like the after school school, right? So you would have a student who would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning to go to a hog one at 5, and then to go another one at 6, and another one at 7, and then go to school and then do an entire school day. And then after that, he'd have another one. So by the time he actually got to my class, the
they
kid
were
was
tired.
sleeping,
Yeah, they were
right?
tired. Yeah,
And when I talked to the parents, it was just like, well, listen, your kid's learning nothing because they're not a robot. They can't actually absorb all this information. It's not that more is better in this point. And this is why I go back to the culture, right? Because I think the system, like, the more I think about it, I would think that this culture makes the system, right? So if the parents themselves were like, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and they pulled the kid out of three-quarters of these institutes, then maybe the kid would do a bit better in general, right? And I think if enough parents did that, then you would have probably a better learning environment, and some of these schools would maybe go bankrupt, but they weren't very
yeah.
efficient
I,
anyways.
I mean, you can say I agree with you in terms of the cultural about that aspect of the culture because
Hmm.
realistically speaking, the school system is set up the way it is, but it's the option of the parents to wanting
Exactly.
to enroll the child into you know 2, 3, 4 more tutorial classes
Hmm. Hmm.
after the fact that their
Hmm.
classes are done, right? At the end of the day, and that's all in an effort to, I guess, give them a leg up. And then if
Right.
one parent does it,
Right.
then another parent wants to do it, and
Exactly.
then all of a sudden everybody wants to
But
do it.
then, but then I go back to the culture because
Yeah,
now it's keeping up the Joneses,
right.
right? Because the
Yeah,
parents like, oh, my son's going. It's like, oh, my son's got to do this too. It's like, well, hold on a second.
yeah,
Maybe your son's a moron and he doesn't need that school and he needs that school.
yeah.
But they would just keep pushing it and be like, no, 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 no. So this is where I go back and go back to the example of people exploring the other side of life, so to speak. What if the parents in that situation taught their kids to be a little more independent, or maybe what if the parents were able to kind of say back, you failed, it's no big deal, it's okay,
Yeah.
everybody fails, I failed last time, right? So this is where I go back to the culture where I kind of think to myself like, I guess one of the things that I want to get across in this podcast is that I think everything starts from home. I think
Hmm.
that's a really important thing, right?
Yeah.
Everything starts from your house. The system obviously influences that, but I think if a parent teaches their kid to be a little bit more individual. And again, these are lofty things. I'm not saying it's such an easy thing. It's not like, how do you teach your kid to be individual? All these, I realize these things are, take time, and they're easier said than done, right? But the point being is that if you have the parent who kind of like try to make sure that their kids are comfortable with failure, let's say, then maybe you would have a lower percentage of kids like, offing themselves, so to speak, in Asia, because they would be better able to deal with failure. Whereas if you have the parents who support the system, and if you get home and the parent is like, there's that traditional Asian thing like, oh, I got 95. Well, what happened to the last 10%? Right? It's like, okay, well, that works certainly. I mean, I'm a big proponent of discipline. Don't get me wrong, but there are certain kids that it doesn't. Right? There's that balance kind of thing, and you should strive to know your child. Whereas like, maybe my kid's going to respond negatively to that. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe my kid needs a little bit more like reward, right, kind of thing. And again, I think in a future podcast you guys will hear that I'm very much against reward. Like I'm more about discipline, but I think in general there needs to be a balance, and I think there needs to be recognition that some children are not like, all approaches don't work the same with all
Yeah,
children, right?
and I think but that's hindsight for us now, because we've gone through. I mean, I think it's agreed,
True.
both you and
That's
I,
true.
growing up in the 80s and
That's
90s.
true.
Basically, it was still very much at that point, education was looked at as a way, as a means. Literally, you go to school, you
Mm,
study for a
true.
career, and then
True.
you end up in that career
Yeah.
done, right?
True.
Whereas when you look at the state of education today and look at how careers today, it's different, because there's so many people who are self-made now. You have
Hmm.
17-year-old,
Hmm.
18-year-olds who have built businesses uh, online, and they're like millionaires,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So the path to education is not fixed anymore. All of a sudden, the doors are blown wide open. If you know technology, if you know how to bend the rules, and you know how to apply them, you could do it, right? So yes, but it's not to say that there's no merit in education. Absolutely, there still is. And there are still, the people who want to be a doctor, who want to be an engineer. You still need to go through those traditional paths. But then there's a whole swath of other people who basically don't want to go that route, or maybe the education system isn't built for those type of people in terms of their mind frame and their way of thinking, and therefore they need to have a different alternative route to be able to reach where they need to go.
So two things
So
here. Like one, I think you just touched on a topic that's we're gonna have to spend an entire episode on that topic. So entire like I agree with you entirely, because yes, I think education has changed. I think, and this is one of the reasons why we have Inspired Scholar to kind of help parents and help students kind of deal with it, because realistically, like, although yes, education has changed, but knowledge acquisition has not,
mhm.
right? And the thing is, a lot of people are talking about like, oh, okay, AI is, yeah, okay. Look, at the end of the day, um, how comfortable you're going to be with a doctor who learned, who used AI to write half his papers, right? There's a certain amount of knowledge that almost every single type of job is going to require, right? You're not going to be able to supplement things. You're not going to be able to Google it all the time, right? You don't want a pilot who's googling how do I how do I land a plane, right? So there's certain things that are always going to be required with people, and I think um, those kind of things need some of those old techniques. But again, that's a different discussion. But back to the East versus West, I think um, I would say that, like, and interestingly enough, maybe some people in the comments can tell us, but I would say that in the West we have more of this um, uh, thinking of how AI is going to influence, and different types of education than the East. I think in the East it's still like more rigid and still kind of like, A B C D.
Mhm.
You have to go and learn your knowledge and your background before you make the next school, or before you get your accreditation or something like that, right?
Mhm.
So like on a personal level, um, I think the way I perceive East versus West for me is that they both suck and they're both great, right? In a sense that I think it's uh, um, where the East fails for me is obviously the pushing, right? Um, but I think that's, kind of everybody always says that. If you talk to the average Chinese parent or Korean parent, they'll always be like, oh, whenever we talk to parents, they're always like, oh, in China, kids is like, I'm just, yeah, 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 yeah. You all think you're pushed. But I think the one thing that you mentioned, I think, what's really the core of this, that keeping with the Joneses, where I think a lot of parents, what they do is they, uh, you know, my son is studying this math class, so this son had, this
Yeah,
semester
yeah,
this kind of thing, right? Where to me, I see that as a little bit like it's fluff, right? It's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
the parent. I don't see the parent kind of thing like, hold on, my kid wants to be an artist, so why would he be
Right.
going to math class, right? It's just like, I'm
Mhm.
going to do this because, so it's that blind following the blind, so to speak, without
Yeah.
looking at the individual, right? I think that is actually something that needs to be really um, reviewed in the Eastern system. However, I think what they do right is rote training for the
That I
basics,
agree. That I
right?
agree. We lack that in the Western school
Yeah.
system, and I've noticed that through basically my own children growing up here, and also myself growing up here in the West, is that whenever whenever a student will come from overseas and basically immigrate here, automatically they're already like a grade or two level ahead
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of math skills, in terms of science skills or whatever it is. And so yeah, definitely routing is something that we don't do here very well in the West. Only because I think the reason why is because there there's more of an emphasis on exploration in terms
Hmm.
of what else is out there. Go find yourself, and hopefully the hope is that child will find that area that they really like
Hmm.
and really dive deep into it.
Hmm.
Quite honestly, some people do it, some people don't, and some children just end up going through school never ever finding that one spot that they really really enjoy, and so therefore you've got mediocre students floating around,
And I,
right?
and I
So
think a lot of that, you can blame the teachers or the parents or whoever, and really it's always everybody to be blamed. But I think the okay, this is something I learned from martial arts as an example, right? When we used to talk about martial arts, like you can't make a style unless you know how to punch, right? So you need to have your basics.
yes,
You can't make anything new unless you have some basics, right? And I
yes.
think this is why in the Western students fail, is because you're right, they're pushed to explore themselves. But how do you explore yourself with no knowledge? How do you know what you want to be or can't be without like knowing what are the possibilities that are out there, right? Like you might say like, oh, I want to be a pianist. Okay, but have you seen I've never seen what a piano looks like. That doesn't make any sense, right? If your parents, let's say, let you play several instruments, and then you come back and want to be okay, that makes sense. You've explored some of these things, and that kind of
Yeah.
thing, right? So I think here again, so this is where the Western system fails, is an overemphasis on exploration when they're young. And I think the reason why it's actually kind of funny. We're in a system now where we are, there's that whole safety room, or let's call safe space, right? All that kind of stupidity was like, oh, we don't want to stress kids out. We don't want this kind of thing. But it's like, but children are like sponges, right? And I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting like you have a situation where the parent beats the kid or something. I'm nothing about that. But challenging challenges to children should be encouraged, right? Because they learn very quickly and they're very resilient, right? So the thing is, to me, it's like if back to your example, kids think, when I came to Canada, right? I came to grade four, and y- most of the kids made fun of me because I don't speak English, right? But when it came to math class, I made fun of them because I thought they were dumb as shit. Because the math I did in grade three in Poland, I didn't do until grade eight in
Right.
Canada.
Right.
So I knew the multiplication tables. We did fractions in Poland in grade three. Like so, and again, this is like it was still communist, so it was a different system than it is now. I think. But the point being was that like to me, I thought all the other kids were just dumb. It's like, why can't they understand all these things? Why are we doing this stuff? I did that in grade one, right? So I think that is something that has allowed. let's say me to learn language faster than the average Joe, because the things that the system, the habits that I got through rote training, through
Yes. Yeah.
memorization, have allowed me to be like, all right, I got to learn these 50 words, and even then the system was better because I remember having a spelling test every week or every second week, because I think most students don't even have spelling tests nowadays. So like, the point is that there's the learning aspect of it, but there's also the habit development aspect of it. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's where the Western education has failed, is that in its pursuit of like, oh, let's let these kids find themselves, we actually haven't given them enough tools to find themselves with,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we've the Asian kids have enough tools, but then the Asian side is where, okay, again, stereotypical creativity
So
or
basically,
lack of it thereof,
yeah.
right?
So basically, in the end, right? It's not that we don't want the children to find themselves or explore
Hmm,
themselves. We do want them to do that. It's just that when it comes down to the foundation, there has to be more routing involved. Just
correct,
because
correct.
they learn how to do it, but
Yep.
then they have to reinforce it so that it becomes automatic and it becomes more natural when it
Yeah.
comes out,
Yeah.
right? And so that was definitely something I think the students would benefit if there
Well,
was more of that routing done, not just math,
no, and
English,
actually, I would say
language, everything.
especially in language,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the thing people don't realize, that language dictates thought.
Hmm.
Okay, so like one of the things that I found, teaching, different students is, for example, um, like, or even communicating with people from Asia, right? Is um, Korean and Chinese and Japanese. Let's say when people from from those countries learn English, they talk in a, what I call, holistic way. Like, they talk in context, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah,
So I use this example, and I know it's not very accurate, but it's the best I can think of right now. Is like, in Korea, when I was hungry, if I wanted to say I was hungry, I didn't generally say I was hungry. I would say, I mean, you can, but my point is that, to kind of like play, I would say, oh, this food looks good, kind of thing, like to indicate that I'm interested in the
yeah,
food and this kind of thing, right?
yeah,
In the Western countries, in Western languages, like in English, you do that, and people are like, you're wasting my time, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah. It's more
hungry? I'm
direct.
hungry. Give me food, right?
Yeah.
So there's that linear communication versus the holistic communication, right? Now, these two ways obviously allow you to solve problems differently, right? And
Hmm.
again,
Hmm.
language, right? In Korean, the verb comes at the end, right? So they all talk like
Yeah,
Yoda, right?
yeah,
So in other words, if you have this thought pattern, you're going to approach problems slightly differently,
hmm,
right? So I think when you have kids who are not taught the fundamentals of language, like grammar and structure and all these kind of things, you end up having kids that can't necessarily. And this is why the reason why critical thinking is almost dead. Is because these kids can't critical think because we never gave them the right tools, right? And then you tell that kid, okay, go find yourself.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, well, how about this? Why don't I take you and drop you in Zimbabwe with nothing, no matter, you go find find a hotel or something like that. No, you need the tools, you need all these
yeah.
things. So I think this is where the Western system has failed. The Eastern system gives them the right background, but then back to what I was saying was in terms of the Asian, lack of creativity, and that comes, I think, from that overemphasis of the rote training, from memorize, memorize,
Yeah,
memorize,
yeah,
and again, culture sipping back into it, because you'll have teachers who, like in Asia, teacher is God, right?
yeah.
This is generalizing. I'm not saying it's all the time, and it is changing. But I remember, like, teaching a new language to an Asian student is much, in a lot of ways, let's say, much more difficult than a European student, in terms of conversational. Let's say, why? Because the European students are generally more outgoing. They're more communicative, so they'll try
Hmm.
to talk to you, and they'll make mistakes. And again, everybody's different, but I'm just generalizing here, right? With the Asian students, they're generally taught in class to listen to the teacher, and the teacher will be like, I say and you listen, right? That doesn't lead to a creative environment, right? You don't, in Korea, I had to, I literally came up with this technique where I had to make the students angry at me
Okay.
before they would engage in discussions and conversations, right?
Yeah,
And it worked quite well. Like, I had instances where the first couple of classes, the students were like shocked because I was always bad mouthing Korea, and they were like, "Oh my god!" And it's just like, okay, then show me otherwise. And they would go home and they would find reasons, and we would, after 3 months, they would come back to me like, "I've never spoken so much English before," and I was like, "Aha!" You see,
Yeah.
I had to kind of figure out a way to get you pissed off enough to talk to me, because
Yeah.
otherwise you come into class and you sit there and it's a conversation class, but
No one's conversing.
yeah, you're just listening to
Yeah.
me talk, right? And I'll be like, oh, so what did you do on the weekend?
So it's
Saw my wife.
interesting. So it's interesting you say that, because you see that, and this is just my own observation in business. And this behavior carries on all the way into your adult career,
Yeah,
because when you look at, again, this is generalizing. When you look at, you know, where the strengths are in the Western business and the Western and Eastern business, Eastern business is all strong, really, really strong when it comes to manpower and accumulating manpower and bringing everybody together and getting
yes,
something done
yes,
fast, well,
yes.
and efficient.
Yeah, communal kind
Okay,
of like
yeah, it's
community,
communal
and
thought.
it's A, B, C,
Yeah,
D, follow
but
directions, get it done,
but
boom,
but
done.
when it comes to
Yeah,
creativity,
yeah,
the West has an advantage,
yeah.
because it's here in the West where all that people are coming up with all these different
Solution.
ideas and
Yes,
solutions
yes.
to things that you never thought was a problem before,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And maybe and so that actually, it's really interesting that we've talked about that, because now it shows how the education system literally translates
Into society.
into society
Yep,
and to your adulthood,
yep,
as an individual in your career.
yep.
So, but yeah, it's one of those things where, you have who are the strongest people, that are the people who can actually take both
Do both.
sides,
That, and that
right?
so this goes back into the, like, to actually kind of finalize and,
Yeah,
and stop it into what we're trying to do, Inspire Scholar, where you try to take the best of both worlds, right? Like,
yeah,
realistically speaking, children are sponges. I tell parents, when I came to Canada, I had to also learn French, right? And in the beginning, I thought, oh my God, like, I have to learn English, I have to learn French at the same time. I spoke Polish at home, and it's going to confuse the hell out of me. And it didn't. And realistically speaking, if you have, if you have a child and they're young, you could put them into 3, 4 different language classes, and as long as there's a support environment for those languages, and they can learn 3 or 4 languages like
yeah.
with ease,
Oh yeah,
right? So I always encourage parents, like, yeah, that's one of the things that if you want to have them explore themselves, give them different languages. That's probably more efficient or more beneficial in the end. But back to what we're trying to do is, like, in the younger, you can do this as an adult, of course, too, but obviously, you're old, you're tired, it takes much longer to do these things, right? But when you're young, you emphasize rote training, right? You give them the tools, the knowledge to be able to, the fundamentals. And then when you get to, let's say, grade 11, grade 12, is when you start extrapolating and be like, all right, so now you got all this stuff. Okay, give me an essay on what do you think this is about, and why do you think that, and, critically analyze this.
yeah,
And then here's several, like, calculus problems. And by the way, how is calculus related in English? Is it related to English? What's the relationship? All these kind of things you can explore. Um, and you kind of show them different ways of approaching these problems and let them run with it, right? And then you hit university, whatever, and then you kind of like extrapolate on that model, right? But I think the systems now in the West, because we're in the West right now, is fundamentally too, they do it too early.
hmm
The creativity stage, or whatever you want to call it, is applied way too early. I think teachers are not creating an environment for the students to actually have the right background, right tools to be able to make these kind of decisions, right? And this is one of the reasons why. And now, again, another podcast is social media,
yeah,
right? Like, what you take the average student, like you and I know each other. Like today, I know every day I struggle for focus,
hmm
right? I'm writing a paper, I'm talking to a parent, I'm writing an email or something, right? Like that. And then sometimes I'm going to take a break, watch YouTube for a bit, right?
yeah,
And we grow up with it. Now imagine if you grow up from that level. So
yeah,
how do you expect a child who grows up in this environment to become an engineer or a tax accountant? The amount, it's like, oh,
yeah,
well, AI is going to do. No, it's not. You need the person to have that knowledge in their head somewhere, right? So I think that actually adds another layer of challenge, and makes, again, we'll have a podcast on teachers too, but one of the things that, yeah, I feel sorry for teachers nowadays, right? Because they're dealing
yeah.
with
It's
with
hard.
they're dealing with kids who have the attention span of a bird,
Yeah,
right? And again, that goes back to parenting, another podcast, but all these things I think have to come from the home. But what we're trying to do is, like, what we're pushing for is take the best of both, give it to the students, enough so that they can develop an understanding and knowledge, and then help them use it for the next level.
Sounds good.
All right, so that's about it. We'll see you next time, and hopefully we'll have maybe a guest or two in the next coming weeks, and we'll let you know who that